Hello and welcome to Riverbeds Steel Central NetProfiler. My intent for today's session is to provide a high-level overview on some of the monitoring and visibility features of the tool. I'm not going to get too detailed on any of these workflows, so if there is an interest, you can contact me at Ian McNamara on LinkedIn, and we can go ahead and we'll set something up, and I'd be happy to schedule a more detailed session. All right, let's take a look. So what we're looking at here is the user interface for the Steel Central NetProfiler. This is also referred to as our dashboard. And before I get too far into the discussion, I want to talk a little bit about the different ways we're able to bring data into the tool to present some of the views that we're going to look at. The first of those data sources being NetFlow. So any of your routers and switches within your environment that are NetFlow capable, we can configure those to send flows back to the tool for reporting and analysis. We can also support SFlow, JFlow, IPFix, some VXLAN, and a number of other flow types. In addition to NetFlow, we support what's called SteelFlow. And SteelFlow is going to be metadata on traffic that passes through our WAN optimization technology, or steelheads. So if you've got steelheads spread out within your environment, we can synchronize with those devices and configure them to send flow back to the profiler for reporting and analytics. In addition to these flow types, we also support packet data. Now, the majority of your performance data is going to come from packets, so things like network round trip times or latency, node response times, connection resets and retransmissions. All that data is going to come out of packet data. Now what do we do with this data? We send all this data up to the profiler, and I think of the profiler as being the brains of the operation. This is the piece of the puzzle that allows us to make sense of all this big data that we're bringing in. It allows us to learn trends in the traffic, develop dynamic baselines, and then pivot and run reports as needed as part of our troubleshooting workflows. All right, let's take a look at what we can do with some of this data in the dashboards. So this is the user interface for the Steel Central NetProfiler tool. This is our dashboard, and I'm going to start the tour today on the service map dashboard. I'm going to start on the service maps because it's my favorite dashboard. Well, it's one of my top 3 favorites, we'll say. So I'm going to start on this dashboard. This is, again, as I mentioned, this is our service dashboard. There's a number of dashboards that come out of the box. You can create as many as you like with whatever content on them that you choose. I'm going to provide a high-level overview today of what some of these dashboards entail and talk a little bit about how we get that data. Again, we're pulling in data from your routers and switches that are NetFlow capable. If you have steelheads in the environment, we can pull those flows in as well. And then, of course, packet data. Now what we're looking at here is the service maps, and the service map dashboard is a way of visualizing all of your key and critical applications, as well as the performance from the users where those applications are accessed. So one of the things we have here is a little matrix showing critical applications along the top axis, and then remote locations along the y-axis here. These locations are defined by their IP space. These are what we call host groups. So a host or location group is what this is referred to as, is just simply defined, like I mentioned, by its IP space. So maybe Columbus/24, Philly/22, 25, whatever it might be. Most of the time remote locations are going to write in over their own separate IP space. We can then create definitions for each of those locations. Once we do that, we can come down here and we can build service maps, or a visual representation of your application service chain. In addition to just creating this map, we're comprehending performance coming in from each of these locations that we choose to watch performance or monitor from. So how this works is there's a short setup period. We have to define the different segments that your application flows through here. We have to tell it which node, maybe my web front end, my app tier, my database tier, certain TCP or UDP connections that are part of that application definition. We have to define that. Once defined, The nice thing about this solution is the tool is going to learn what's normal. The tool is going to learn what's the traffic pattern between and through each of these network segments, between each of these logical tiers, my web, my app, my database tier. And by learn what's normal, I mean we're going to learn what's my round trip times for packets between each segment, or my latency. What's my node response times? What's my retransmissions or connection resets looking like? What's my average connections, my peak connections looking like? I can watch connection duration or connection bandwidth even. So I'm watching all these key performance metrics, and I'm going to learn what's normal. So once this application or this service chain has been defined, after about 2 weeks, the tool watches each of those segments and it learns that normal pattern. We call that our dynamic baseline. Once we have that dynamic baseline, we're then going to compare each of those metrics I just described in real time against that baseline. Anytime any of those metrics deviates from that norm or that dynamically learned baseline that we've put on the shelf, we're going to let you know by changing one of these segments, one of these green lines, from green to red. I can then drill into that segment and find out what's the source of my degradation. Is it a network issue? Is it something changed with my retrans? Is it maybe my node response time went from 30 to 300 or to 1,000 milliseconds? Whatever it might be, having this visualization around each of your components of your application gives you a great idea of where to go and investigate. Where should I spend my troubleshooting efforts within this service chain? If everything's green in the back end, probably nothing's changed back here. If something's red, that's probably where I need to investigate, and this is where I'll most likely find the source of my degradation. I'm not going to get too far into the workflow for drilling into any of these segments. I'm going to save that for if there's an interest, you can contact me at LinkedIn or ian.mcnamara@riverbed.com, and I'd be happy to set up a more thorough demonstration. But for now, I'm just going to kind of touch on some of the highlights. I want to just go over big picture things. I don't want to spend too much time here, but just know that through this service mapping mechanism that we have, we can watch all of your applications, each segment. One of the things I tell folks a lot is anytime I have an environment or an enterprise type environment, a very large environment, a lot of apps, a lot of tiers, application tiers spread out all over the place, it's difficult to know what is the threshold, or what is the SLA within any one of those segments. How would I statically define that? It'd almost be an impossible task. So having the tool learn what's normal when things are working as expected, when no users are calling in complaining about performance issues, I find that to be very valuable, very helpful. So I love the service map page. We've got a number of different visualizations we can apply here. We can just watch your service chain. We can take an application and look at the different locations to access that application and show high-level health of each of those locations. We can comprehend load balancers. As you can see in this service map, I've got a load balancer VIP here. We can even log into the load balancer and look at the different NAT sessions and choose which ones apply to this particular app that we're defining. We can comprehend front-end IP address, back-end SNAT address, so very flexible with how we can accommodate those application environments. So this is service map. One of the things I did mention about was our host groups. We group things by IP space, and one of the reasons I'm bringing that up is because we've got up here, if I wanted to look into any one of those locations, we have here what I call Google for your network. So once those definitions are defined, my locations are defined, I can also define functional groups, right? So if I want to put my DNS servers or maybe my email servers or my wireless access points in a group based on their function, I can define those also by their IP space. But the nice thing is once I've defined all these groups, I can come up here into Google for my network and I can just type the word by. And typing the word by brings up all my host groups. And those host groups might be function, as I mentioned, location, I might have a by app group. We've got some flexibility here. You can create your own container structure if you like, and then group objects within that container accordingly. It's a very quick way of getting at information. So maybe I want to look at my by location groups. I'm going to type BYL, which brings up just by locations. I can then select any one of these. Maybe I want to select my data center. Somebody's calling in from the data center saying, hey, 10 minutes ago things got really bad. We're working great all morning. Can you just take a look high level at what's going on in the data center, to and from the data center? Maybe something looks different than usual. We can, again, using the Google from a network up here, this little field, I can do a quick search on everything in the data center and run a report. And I'm going to see here all the traffic going in and out of the data center. I can see the top applications that are being served from my data center. I can see top applications being consumed from my data center, etc. So very detailed report there going on of everything that's coming in and out of the data center, even a DSCP breakdown. So maybe I see some in here, AF11. Well, I wouldn't expect AF11. What is that? Each of these metrics within these matrices or within these tables that we've presented here are live. They're actionable. I can drill down into any one of these. So if I wanted to investigate further into that AF11 traffic, I could right click here, say traffic, show me traffic for this DSCP in context by host pairs. That's then going to whip up for me a report showing me all the conversations that are riding over AF11. So I can pivot from anywhere, allows me to be very flexible, very agile, and move in any direction at any time depending on where my troubleshooting workflow takes me. This is one of the things I like about this report. It gives me this little dependency map. I'm a picture guy, love pictures. So this kind of just allows me to run through here, and this is a pretty messy, pretty busy one, so it's not going to give me a whole lot, but just know that these are live too. I can hover over any one of these links, right click, get additional information. Also, one thing to note is that any one of these places where I've got a source, destination, or conversation, I can right click and I can drop into packets. I can export this to a PCAP or CAP file and then open that up with my own decoder of choice. Maybe it's Wireshark, or maybe if I have our Riverbeds transaction analyzer, I can open it up in the analyzer. Also know that we have direct integration between our packet analyzer, or this used to be called Pilot. We have integration with that in the Steel Central NetProfiler, so I can offload packets of this conversation directly to our packet analyzer for further investigation. Just something to know there. One other thing I'll mention, because I like this a lot. If I'm interested in the path of this conversation, maybe I want to understand, maybe we think we have some performance issues due to dropping DSCP, for instance. So maybe I want to say, show me traffic between these hosts by flows. Came down here and there's a little by flows line. And now I can see that conversation, not only source and destination, and also the time that that conversation took place. But if you look over here, you can see I'm showing the hops that that conversation took along with their DSCP value. In this scenario, I'm preserving my DSCP the entire path, but let's say, for instance, I was dropping somewhere. Maybe we're getting users calling in saying my performance for the phone call got horrible recently, or maybe there's an application you have tagged with priority and the performance of that application got poor, something happened. I can come in here and I can see my hops, and it might show AF11, 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 default. I can very quickly see where I'm dropping those markings, and then just isolate that particular piece of infrastructure and go look and find out what's happening at this piece of this node here that would account for why I'm dropping. So just helps me get at the culprit, the offender who's dropping those tags a little bit quicker. So that was a quick report. I got off on a little bit of a tangent there, talking about my Google for my network. But since we were talking about host groups there, I thought it made sense, and those can be very helpful. One other thing, since we're talking about Google for your network, I'm not limited to just my host groups. If I have this tied into Active Directory, I can type in a username here and pull up all that user's traffic for this 1 hour default is the report, but I can change that time period. So I can go back in time and look for a user's traffic. I can just search for application type, a protocol, a certain DSCP. If I just want to look at all AF11 traffic, I can pull up everything environment-wide that is riding over an AF11 marking. It's very flexible there. Helps me in being agile and move wherever I need to during that troubleshooting process. So this is a service map dashboard. It leverages our dynamic baseline. I love this dashboard. One of the other dashboards I like a lot, though, and one of the things that we can do with the dashboards, I want to point this out, is maybe my job isn't to watch all of our apps. Maybe my job is just to watch a particular app. So what I've done here is I've taken our ERP application, and I've basically just I've dedicated an entire dashboard to just ERP. So I've got the service map, so I'm leveraging the dynamic baseline. I want to know if the tool senses any of my metrics getting out of whack, so I can keep a good eye on each of the performance within each of those tiers. I've got a matrix over here showing each of my remote locations that access ERP along with their health. And right now it looks like my users are not happy. Fortunately, this is a demo rig, so hopefully there's no real upset users. But if this is your production environment, this would be a sign that ERP is struggling. Being that it's struggling from everywhere, looks like we're running hot from everywhere, my guess would be that the problem is on the app side. Because Anytime every one of your sites is affected, chances are it's something in the middle. So what I've done here, I've got my service map, got my high-level widget showing all the different sites accessing. I've also got down here a matrix showing me the little bit of some performance information for my web tier. One of the things you'll notice since I'm talking about this matrix is some up and down arrows. And here's another, I love this feature. This is the comparative analysis feature. And what this is doing is it's taking a metric in real time. So I'm looking at real-time retrans, real-time average server delay, real-time average response time, real-time network round-trip times or latency. So all these real-time metrics, and I'm comparing it to a previous point in time. So let's assume the scenario here is I'm running right now when users have called in to say we're having a problem with this particular application. Well, right now this widget is comparing all these metrics in real time and it's comparing them to a previous point. And now here's where I can configure that previous point. I can say, what do you want me to compare it to? I have some options. I can say compare it to same time 1 day before, same time 1 week before, or same time 4 weeks before. I'm just going to leave it what it is at 1 day before. That's fine for now. I personally like the 1 week before because if I come in on a Monday, I really don't care about Sunday's metrics, right? I would expect that my Sunday metrics to be very different than my Monday metrics. So sometimes 1 day before isn't so good of a fit, but usually my Mondays should match Mondays, my Tuesdays should match Tuesdays, etc. So in this case, we'll pretend it's doing it to a week before. I'd change it right now, but it might take a minute to refresh and I don't want to take the time. But you can see what that does is it helps add some context to the metric. So if I come in here and I see we've got 5% retrans packets. Well, if maybe 5% retrans packets normal. Maybe there's always 5% for this particular link going to this server. So if I come over here and I see, well, even though there's 5% retrans, there's 0% increase, we'll pretend this is 0, then that might say, well, maybe my problem, the metric that's changed is a retrans, so that's probably not what's to account for the degradation that I'm hearing about from my user community. So it just helps me understand a little bit more about, is this normal for the metric right now, what I'm seeing, or not? And if it is normal, if I come in here and say, oh, that metric is normal, it hasn't deviated more than 2%, maybe I can move on to some of these other metrics and find out which one has deviated from that dynamic baseline. So in addition to this matrix, some high-level metrics I'm showing, I'm graphing response time here. I love being able to graph response time. For some reason, that's just exciting to me. I'm watching all of my web tiers response time, and most of them are hugging this x-axis here. I can't even see them, which is good. That's what they should be performing as, very, very quick, very snappy. I've got one of them, though, as we can see, web server 33, that is functioning pretty poorly, up to around 3, almost 4 seconds at times for response time. So I can see there's something different with web server 33. Maybe I want to go investigate and find out what's going on before I start getting calls from my user telling me that they're having performance issues with ERP. There's enough other web servers that hopefully most of my users are coming into them, that I'm not taking down the whole environment. Hopefully we can get ahead of this and get web server 33 fixed so that our entire web farm is healthy here. I like this little stack graph. Helps me if there's any load balancing or distribution going on in my web tiers. This kind of gives me an idea, a feel for, is that distribution happening evenly? And then I've done the same down here for my app tier. I've got a high-level widget showing high-level metrics. I'm graphing response time. Then I'm also graphing traffic to each device. And I've done the same for my database. So I like taking all 3 tiers in my service chain and building some widgets to reflect the performance within each of those tiers, and then having one dedicated dashboard just for that entire application. Now I also come down here and maybe I've got some WAN links. I wanted to add this widget, and adding a widget onto a dashboard is a simple process, right? If I wanted to add a new widget, if I get all this populated and say, no, there's one thing I would like to see in addition to this information I have here, I can come up here to this dashboard options, and I can drop down and just say add widget. And when I do the add widget, it's going to say, what type of widget would you like? I've got some different options, whether I want it to be a service type widget, a network traffic widget, AD type widget. Let's assume I want a network. I've got a number of options in there. Application, host pair. So very flexible with the type of widget that I can build here. Very easy to build those widgets. In this scenario, I want to watch my WAN links because these are critical sites. These sites generate a lot of revenue for a company, and they must remain in optimal condition, and their performance must always be wonderful from these locations. So maybe I want to have a widget showing me the health of each of those. And I can see here I got a couple running hot. But I can also see there's not a lot of change for some of these. So maybe it's used to running hot. Maybe we're going to upgrade it in a month and we know it's running hot, but it really hasn't yet began to affect the performance of my users coming across that link. So right now, running hot isn't a big deal. That's probably not going to cause me a performance issue. If I see that up maybe 15% running hot and we're nearing 100%, now maybe there's an issue that I need to be concerned of. Awareness is key, getting in front of issues, and this helps me with some of that awareness. So that is the service map dashboard, or the ERP map dashboard, I guess. Not just a service. It contains a service, but it's not the service map. The service map dashboard contained all the services. This is just a dashboard that's dedicated to one service in particular. Now here's something I'll talk a little bit about. If I wanted to run a historical report on this service or any other service, one of the things I like about a reporting engine is that it allows me to be very granular in terms of the types of things that I need to report on. So if I'm responsible for just ERP, and maybe one of my tasks every week is to report on the health of ERP to the business, I can come into here, and as you can see, I already have ERP selected, but I can report on anything. If I have a health policy that's I've made, or if I have a performance and availability policy that I've made, I can get very granular and select just those policies that are of interest to me and then run a report on them for some period of time. So in this scenario, I might say, okay, I care about ERP because I'm responsible for ERP and making sure that it's up and operational all the time. And I need to report on how long it was up for the last week, how long it was down, how many incidents we had, etc. So I can set the time frame that I want this report to be run on, tell it what I want it to run against, and then say run now. And it will then generate for me a report showing me the health of ERP for the last 1 week. So a lot of times this is some manual labor and takes a sustained organization a bit of time to put this together, whereas we're providing a report, and in about 5 seconds it generated for me everything that happened to ERP in the last week, all the incidents that were generated, a number of other pieces of information that would be helpful with understanding the availability of ERP. So let's see, we talked about host groups a little bit. We can, like I mentioned, we have the ability to group things by their IP space in what we call host groups, but we also can create interface groups. So an interface group is simply just what it sounds. I'm creating containers based on some common denominator with regard to an interface. So maybe for a lot of things I have, making IP groups make sense. But maybe if I've got different providers coming in, I've got a US signal and maybe a Time Warner signal bringing in data, one over each different MPLS provider, one's primary, one's backup, and I want to be able to separate and watch traffic from each of those providers. There's a couple ways that I can do that. Maybe there's some IP grouping that I can do to create that type of view, but I could also, one of the easy things I'm thinking of is I could create interface groups. So I might have and I created this little structure prior to this, but I might have a WAN provider, top container, and then I might have provider 1, provider 2. And I might have some WAN interfaces that are coming off this provider and some WAN interfaces that are coming off this provider, and then I can drop into any one of these containers and view all the traffic coming out of the interface. So this is just where you build the interface groupings. So I've already put an interface in this container, and if I wanted to add another one, it's as simple as right-clicking and saying add members. At that point, I'd have the ability to search through all of my interfaces and then pick and choose and add whatever other interface maybe makes sense to go within this US container or provider 2 container, whatever it might be. Now, where would I see the output of this container structure? How would I use that? Well, I'd come over here, instead of selecting dashboard, I'd select network navigate, and under here I've got views. Now we've got a couple of default views. I think deployment comes out of the box and it's just going to show all the interfaces right off the root. I wanted to create a little bit more of a structure, so I created this global hierarchy. Now I can come in here and I can see that within my US container, or let's pretend this is provider 2, I then have an interface. I could select that interface, so maybe this is WAN 01 coming out of my provider 2 circuit. I can then get a look at what's all the different traffic types, how much throughput am I seeing coming through that interface. What's the application breakdown look like? What's the application types coming across the interface? What's my DSCP breakdown, etc. So similar to some of the other visualization styles we've seen within the reporting engine, we just can now access some of those views via this interface grouping mechanism we have. So I think that's important to note. We can define by IP groups, so IP space or interface. Two different ways of creating group definitions. Let's see, what else might we want to talk about? For the dashboards, I want to real quick talk about, so this is, we showed you the service dashboard, showed you a application dedicated dashboard with ERP, but I'll also talk a little bit about dashboard creation and some of the flexibility in there and some of the different things we can do. I'll click on here, this is our NetOps dashboard, right? So this is one that comes out of the box, and we've got some widgets on here. Each of these is called a widget. So you might think of them as a panel or a card. We call them widgets. And if I wanted to add a new widget, like I mentioned before, it's as simple as add widget. I can also do a few things with, if I already have a widget here and I wanted to change the line style, right? I can go into edit this and it'll have some options underneath the appearance that'll allow me to change. It's currently set to half width. I can change it to full. What's my display unit that I want to present on the dashboard? I'm a megabits guy. I don't like bits per second. So I usually change that. I can name it. I can tell it what I want to graph on. Right now, most of these by default, we're going to graph by average bits per second, but I can graph on, shoot, just about anything here. I can graph on retrans. I can graph on an average response time. I can graph on connections, you know, so it's almost limitless with the different things, how I want to visualize these metrics. So in this scenario, we're looking at top hosts coming into the environment, top applications floating around my environment, top ports, so these are layer 4 ports. Maybe we don't have a definition around these yet, so they're just showing up as layer 4 ports. But again, one of the things to note here is that these are all live. These are actionable widgets. So if I see something here and I want to maybe get a better understanding of who's contributing to that chunk of traffic, it's as simple as a right click, show me traffic for this application in context, host pairs, and I am off and running generating a report that's going to give me some great visibility into that chunk of the pie, or that type of application traffic. I've got all my conversations here. I've got a connection map as we talked about earlier. So just allows me to be flexible, pivot wherever I need to, whenever I need to. I'm a curious learner. I like to, as I was going through these, just pivot everywhere. Sometimes you can get on a bit of a rat hunt, but it's fun. It's a lot of fun and different things I can do with it, the things I can see, the ease of access to different data points. So down here again we have that comparative analysis table. The comparative analysis feature is not enabled by default. It's not going to be turned on, but again, all you do is to get access into that is edit the widget, go into your time component, or your time tab, same time 1 week before, and usually after you change a widget, you might have to come back up to the top here and hit refresh, because it might just show up empty initially. You hit refresh, it'll populate, and you'll have your data. Now, one of the things I will say is that this dashboard there's no filters in this dashboard. This is showing everything environment-wide. So if I wanted to maybe have a dashboard dedicated entirely just to a particular site, I can do that. I can say when I create the dashboard, maybe I want to, these are my filter options down here, right? Traffic expression, filter options. If I want to filter on a location, for instance, I can just say, click that location and say, okay, and now all the content that's going to be presented on this dashboard that I'm creating is going to be based out of the Columbus site. I could even go further if I wanted to say, I just care about Columbus web traffic. I could add that to my criteria as well. So I can get as granular as I'd like, or I can have it be as wide open as I like and just be environment wide. And that's the scenario we have here. Also know that I can share these with whoever I want. I can make it public, or I can just share it with certain individuals that I've specified as having access to this. And I can also create, I can tailor the permissions that folks have within the dashboard. So if I just want someone to be a dashboard viewer, for instance, and not be able to drill into any data, I can configure that as well. One other thing that I will mention is we've got some policies here. And these policies are just another way of leveraging that dynamic baseline. I have the ability to, these performance and availability policies are going to leverage the dynamic baseline. So if I wanted to, for instance, create an application policy, I could define the criteria that I want the tool to watch, source, destination, application, or layer 4 port, what's the servers or what's the clients that I want to watch. Maybe I just have a couple of web servers and I want to make sure that all of my users who are accessing over my wireless environment are healthy. So I can define the what here, the something in the what to watch, and then down here you can see here's all the metrics that I'm going to be keeping track of or learning as part of that dynamic baseline. New connections, up or down, active connections, average connection duration, response times, number of TCP resets, retrans, average app throughput. So you can see these 7 metrics are typically going to reflect the performance of your application. And anytime your application behavior changes or something gets different or your performance starts to degrade, one of these metrics is going to reflect that. One of these metrics is going to change, it's going to deviate from that dynamically learned baseline, and we're going to alert you by whatever action you choose. And that's down here. If I want to say, I just want this to log only, I can tell it to log only, or I can set it as a default action. And then I can configure my default action to be email network team, or email just me, or whatever it is I need this to do, take some action. But I can define that underneath the action and roles section of the tool. Not going to get into that right now. So these are policies that leverage the dynamic baseline, but also know that we have the ability to set static thresholds or define static thresholds. And that's where these user-defined policies come in. So if I have, for instance, response time policy, maybe I care about when a particular server gets above or a certain threshold. I can define that threshold here, so it's not learning anything. This is just a value that we specify. If the metric that we choose gets over that, then I'm going to take some action, whatever that action is that I've defined. I also have link utilization, right? So if I wanted to watch interface, if I want to watch this interface, let me know anytime it gets above 80%. Or if I want to know anytime it gets below 1%. Maybe if I want to configure it to watch for failover events. Maybe my failover works so great that we don't know about it when we have a failover. So knowing when my throughput drops to some value would be an indication of a failover event. Oftentimes that can be helpful as well. So the policies are just an extension of some of that service mapping, a different way if we want to leverage the dynamic baseline or create static type policies. We'll finish up on reporting real quick here. And within the reporting interface, you'll see that we have 4 tabs. We've got a tab for if you wanted to do some type of host reporting, if you wanted to do some type of reporting around an interface. We've got also a tab if you wanted to get specific with regard to an application, if you're looking for a certain type of application traffic. But then also we have an advanced tab. And I spend most of my time within the advanced tab because I feel like I have access to all the other components. If I wanted to include something specific to an interface, I have the ability to do that here. I've got your typical source destination fields for a host or host group. Remember the host groups that we defined earlier? And we can even say it doesn't have to be, for instance, if I put, for instance, app server 1 here. If I wanted my result set from this report to be everything outside of app server 1, so excluding app server 1, maybe I could say outside. But provided that I want the source of this to be included within the report, I'm going to leave it at within. So in this scenario, I've got app server 1 here. A couple things down here also we'll look at. This is kind of my TiVo for your network, as I call it. If I want to have the ability to go back in time, I down here have some time controls. I can say starting 1 or specify some value here and then select 1 hour ago, 1 minute ago, 1 day ago, 1 week, month, year, etc. We're typically going to keep the raw data for about 3 days, 3 to 5 days from a raw packet perspective, and then I try to size the solution typically to roll the packets off after about 3 to 5. Usually 3 to 5 is a sufficient retention period in that if you come in Monday and you had an issue on Saturday that you still need the packets for, you can go back in time using these time adjusters here. And as you can see, this allows me to go back further. But if I want raw data, raw packets, I usually want to get that within about 3 days just to make sure that I can get to that level of granularity. But I can still get metadata on the flows beyond that 3-day period. So even if my packets roll off, I still have records showing me the traffic behavior for time periods going beyond 3 days. So in this scenario, let's just say that I've got an app server that we're decommissioning. and we're about to pull the plug on it this weekend, but before doing so I want to make sure that there's no traffic going to that server still. So I'm going to type in here that server's name. We could type in, of course, its IP address as well if we wanted to, but since we're in sync with DNS, we're going to just use the host name. Now if you come down here, you can see I also have the ability to choose the role of that device that I want. If I want it to be reported on in just a client role, so maybe where it's making requests to other devices, or whether it's in a server role where requests are being made to it. But in this scenario, I'm going to say I want to see when it's client or server. I want to know everybody who's talking to it. I have the ability to filter on BGP, autonomous system, quality of service, apps and ports, and a number of other options here. Network segment. Now this is one of the things that I'll talk a little bit about in that this report by feature. So what I choose here often depends on what I'm looking for. So if I want the output of this report to just report on layer 4 ports, not necessarily each individual conversation, but just high level the ports, I might just leave it here. If I want to see every single conversation going on to it, I might say host pairs. If I want to see every conversation and layer 4 port, I might say host pairs with ports. So it really depends what I'm looking for that will drive this report by option. In this scenario, I'm just looking for high-level traffic. I want to see if anyone's still talking to it, and if so, what's the traffic type. So ports will work fine here. I might even say host pairs with ports, so that I understand also their the application that they're exchanging. So let's go ahead and run this. And when I run that, it's going to generate for me a report, and it's going to by default cover the last 1 hour. So if I run this and realize, hey, this is not the time frame of interest that I'm really looking for, even though the report's been generated, I have the ability here to come and expand the report criteria, make the modifications that I need to, and then rerun the report. But we'll leave the report here for now and just look at some of the things that are within the report. Here we're looking at traffic volume by bits per second perspective again, top 10 host pairs, so the top 10 conversations sorted by average bits per second. Down here's the host pairs with ports that I was looking for. So I was going to go just high-level applications, but I wanted to see some of the conversations along with the port. And here's what that TCP or that host pair by port affords you, is this extra column here. So I've got my client and my server, but also the TCP port that they're talking. So it gives me some idea of, okay, here's the app that they're talking also. Got some DNS still going on here. I got some 7280, some SQL, so I can see there's a fair amount of traffic still. And another thing to note is that when you choose host pairs or host pairs with ports, you get this connection map here. And I like this. This really is a nice showing for when you're doing things like this. When you're decomming a server, you can get a nice visualization of everybody who's still communicating with that device. And again, I can drill into any one of these that I want to at any time. Maybe I didn't expect this leg of the conversation to be here. I can right click on that and I could get packets if I wanted to. I could say show me traffic between these hosts with ports by whatever other view that I wanted to at this point. So I can continue to pivot from here, or I can just offload this conversation to packets, or I could even send it to our packet analyzer. So a lot of good information in the host information report. This shows me definitely that there's still some folks communicating with that app tier. Maybe everybody didn't get the email that we're bringing the server down this weekend, so this would be a good artifact to let me know who I need to go visit with before I take this server out of commission. I don't want to pull the plug on anybody who's still connecting to my app tier. I want to make sure that everybody's remapping to a different database if they need to, and getting my server out of their workflow. Let's talk about a couple of other things we can do with this report now that we've generated it. Over here on the right, you can see we've got some report options. If I wanted to, at this point, I could save this report and reuse this as a template. Maybe I like some of the other components that I've created for filters on this, and I might want to just change one or two components. I can save this to serve as somewhat of a template. If I like this report, and maybe some of my upper management needs to see this every Friday, I have the ability to schedule this report. I can configure this to automatically run at a certain time period of my week, maybe every Friday morning at 8 a.m. I can have it emailed to a certain group and also send them a little message with that report. So it's just nice to be able to automate that. I can also print this out. I could email it to a different group or team. I can export it to a number of different formats, CSV, HTML, PDF, I can change the display units, etc. So, as I mentioned, pretty flexible. A nice way of getting at, we've got a lot of big data coming in here. This makes for a nice interface to just mine through that big data and access anything, anywhere that I need at any time. So that's the reporting engine, summary version of that. If you'd like to see more, again, contact me offline and I'd go ahead and be happy to set something up. But I think here's a good place to stop for the day, for the session. Hope you feel like you've got something out of the session. And once again, I'd like to thank you for choosing Riverbed.